Well, it's good to meet you all and to see Naomi. So I'm going to give you some thoughts about, um, you know, how to build a British brain economy strategy that is very much focused on productivity, which I understand is a major issue at the highest levels of British government and society. So I'm a physician and scientist by training, but I now work purely in economic strategy. So I'm going to just give you these ideas and I'd send you these slides. I think Naomi's already got them. We can figure out, how to push this forward. I lead the Global Brain Economy Initiative, which is the platform that tries to coordinate this brain economy transition across the world. So that's the context. This work reached into the global economic, political, business zeitgeist in Davos in January through the publication of this report, The Human Advantage, Stronger Brains in the Age of AI. It's a 50-page report that covers in great detail what the brain economy is and why it's needed and what's the economic benefit of going through a brain economy transition. So it's jam-packed with lots of information. And if this topic is at all of any interest to you, then you can read that and learn a lot more. Framing this work in terms of AI is how I have found, just amongst us in Chatham House rules, is the way to get the most attention, which you can probably understand, but I'll get into that in a second. So anyway, you can find this report online. The idea with the brain economy transition, again, which I came to after a career in mental health and neurology and neuroscience and hospital management, is to, it's strategic simplification. We need people in business and politics understand that brains are infrastructure, that the modern economy runs on brain capital, which is the health and the skills of the brain, which again, I can break that down into many ways for the scientists and clinicians on the call, but this is the way that I speak to political and business leaders. So the point is that we invest not very much actually in the human brain. We invest a lot in roads and bridges and data centers, but not in the human brain. And if we actually did invest significantly as much as we needed to in the brain and mind, we could unlock at a global level $6.2 trillion of productivity and GDP value by 2050. And so I imagine, Naomi, the McKinsey Health Institute could generate ROI data for a potential UK brain plan about what the GDP value would be of some sort of brain economy strategy in the UK, if you ask them. It'd just be a matter
I think that would be incredibly helpful. I think one of the biggest problems is always funding, and trying to get any sort of funding for healthcare is always so challenging, that if we can find an alternate way of framing it so that it's seen as an investment, I think that's going to be incredibly helpful.
Yeah. Going to health ministers and health bureaucrats, let's be honest, we've tried that for so long and it doesn't really work. They're seen by high-level politicians like finance ministers and prime ministers as just having this sort of escalating budget that doesn't seem to ever go down. And so part of what I'm trying to do with the brain economy is reposition issues of the brain and mind as whole of society, finance, economic, sort of prime ministerial agendas, so that we can look for other ways to try to go about doing the work that we like to do. So yeah, just to sort of make that point, Naomi, and you guys know that, we're in an era of constant disruption and there are lots of unprecedented challenges across the lifespan. And so I maybe don't need to go too much into this because you guys are thinking about this already, but we do need to think about these issues across the entire life. It's not just brain health, which encompasses mental health and neurological health. It's also brain skills. So literacy, numeracy, education, workforce, labor market issues. We need to factor all of that in. the building blocks of the brain economy, for people that haven't heard this before, is it is about brain health, which I mentioned before, and you're familiar with this paradigm that is slowly gaining traction and is being considered in the DSM-6, for example. It's about brain function and prevention or treatment of mental neurological substance use disorders. It's been popularized a lot, mostly in Europe, by the European Academy of Neurology. They just did a European Brain Health Summit. So it's, there's now a Lancet Brain Health Commission. So it's slowly getting traction and being refined over time. Brain skills are the skills which are critical to survive and thrive in the modern economy, like adaptability, empathy, AI literacy, etc. Brain capital is this economic asset that brings brain health and brain skills together. So you think of brain capital as human capital 2.0, or human capital in the age of neuroscience. And that's one of the things that makes the brain economy seem to be captivating to people, is we're framing it in terms of economics. Brain capital is the stock. Capital is the stock of something, so it's the stock of whatever is in our brains. And I'll talk more about that in a second. So this idea of a brain economy transition is about moving society from a brain negative state where we're depleting brain capital to a brain positive state where we're building brain capital. That's the simple transition narrative. And this economic transition work is obviously being modeled from the energy transition, where we move society from fossil fuels to clean energy. There's other transitions like the nature positive transition, where you have nature capital, which is an economic asset incorporating nature, from biodiversity to ocean and forest health, etc. That you call it natural capital, and you recognize that we're in a nature negative, nature depleting position, and we must transition to nature positive. So this is all sort of nothing is new under the sun here. It's taking a lot of lessons from other successful economic transitions. When you look at brain capital and this global index that we launched in Davos as well, the index incorporates brain health measures, brain skill measures, and sort of enablers or degraders of brain capital across like socioeconomic digital determinants. When you look at this and incorporate it into an index, you find that brain capital was going up, and then it started going down. And now we're in a very vulnerable, volatile position. And it's a question about what's driving all of this, what was driving it to go up, what was driving it to go down. And these are all good questions. And it's actually the subject of a Nature Medicine Commission that we've just had approved a couple of weeks ago that we're going to go public with soon. We have established a commission of 25 academic faculty to dig into this and build this out and put it through a peer review process. An interesting question would be, if you had this data at the UK level, what would it show? And so I would recommend that if you're interested in a UK brain plan, that you try to take the analytic engine of how we did this globally and try to get that data in the UK and apply it to the UK, because this is an amazing conversation starter with politicians and business leaders. And of course, it's very complicated. So it's, you can argue till the cows come home about what should or shouldn't be in or out and why is it going up or down at a given time. But that's the point. It's having that discussion that allows you to sort of start to develop new ways to try to boost brain capital ultimately and link it better to productivity measures. So the brain economy is managed in pieces, which you guys know intuitively. We've got health systems doing things, education systems doing things, employers doing things, and then we've got the public sector doing other things. And most of these worlds don't talk to each other, but they're all super important to our agenda. And so it's just important to sort of mention that. And I know in the UK context, there are issues like the NEET, the Never in Education or Employment or Training or whatever that acronym is that doesn't seem to be used anywhere else but the UK. So
not in education or training.
Yeah, that's a great example of how education, labor, and mental health gets linked, particularly in the context of youth. And so you're already doing this in many ways. And I think the Reserve Bank Governor of England was in whenever that person goes to Reserve Bank governor meetings, like last year, they were talking about NEAT and youth mental health. So UK is doing leadership in this area, and which is good. Not solving the problem because it's very difficult, but at least those are some ideas, and examples of leadership from the UK. So, we obviously need a shared framework to try to bring these things together. There's no single sector that's responsible for this. And we need to have a collective agenda. We need to have measurement systems, platforms for research, policy, practice, and capital. Um, uh, so, let's do that. And I think the plan that you're thinking of can do this if you wish. And so the Global Brain Economy Initiative that we established, which is based at Rice University in Houston, Texas, and is a partnership with other universities and nonprofits and companies. That's how this schema here is how we operate. We're interested in knowledge development, so new forms of research and measurement and new insights. We're interested in thought leadership and communication, cross-sector coordination and mobilization. And again, you can straight lift as much of this as you want because it's that none of this is competitive. Our job is meant to try to empower regional examples of this work. So for us, we have these 5 goals in the next year, which map to our working group. So each one of these columns is a work group. We have a research agenda, which I mentioned is building out and pressure testing that index. On the pilot brain economy strategy side, we have the first city in the world, Houston, Texas, that is embarking on a brain economy transition. It's called Project Metis, and it's got its own website now, braincapitalhtx.com. And we're also now thinking about a World Economic Forum Brain Economy Cities initiative to try to bring cities together around the world to try to coordinate. But that's a whole interesting question of the brain meets regional economic development, which is a fascinating frontier. The third piece of work we have is on brain lens investing. So figuring out how to work with high finance to channel capital into brain positive pursuits in health and education and labor and startups and potentially also in things like real estate. So we're working on sort of driving brain lens investing as a framework into high finance, and then also working on an actual investment fund to be determined with a group called Second Muse Capital. The fourth pillar here is on basically health systems. How do health systems go through a brain economy transition, which the prior speaker, Killian, was getting at some ways that could happen. So this is a form of transition that you can take a health system through. It's not just research, it's about how they're thinking differently about clinical care, about innovation, community health, how they treat their workforce. It's really across all the functional domains of a health system is how we need to do that. And you can look at University of Texas Medical Branch is probably the first health system in the world to do that. And we're very interested in establishing a network of health systems that want to learn from each other. The fifth one is around organizations. So non-health organizations, how do they engage in the brain economy, like energy companies or banks or whatever? And so that's really gets towards what are we doing for the workers of companies? And that's a piece of work that we're doing, trying to figure out what is the deliverable that we're going to produce. And that's a sort of work in motion. There is a sixth work group, which is a university alliance. We have so many universities around the world that are interested in this and what it means to universities in terms of new research ideas and ways of raising philanthropy and education modules and whatever. And so that's another thing that we have in mind. And universities like UCL, for example, I look at as like leaders in doing all sorts of different sorts of brain-related work. UCL doesn't seem to be integrated particularly in and of itself. So but that's fine. It does interesting things across the university, but you could imagine that becoming a sort of a brain forward university if it desired in a more integrated way. So this brain economy work has a lot of momentum. We're engaging now pretty much at the World Economic Forum, the G7, the World Health Assembly, the G20, the UN General Assembly. We're trying to be like a sidecar to these multilateral forums so that we're influencing them more and more with each of these types of events. And it seems to be working, but it takes time. And of course, the UK is a good, member and engaged with many of these things. We have for the G7 France, we have a European Brain Economy Summit in Brussels on May 5th, if any of you want to attend that to learn more. Yeah, it's that anyway, point made there. This is our organizational structure, which I guess I share with you because you could replicate it for your UK brain plan if you so desired, with a steering committee and a lead person and work groups and a secretariat, and then you have various types of advisors and funders. So this is just potentially useful for you. Our working groups all have case studies that I've pretty much mentioned now of entities that are first movers in our different work groups. I mentioned the Nature Commission on Research, Project Metis on Place-Based, which is the Houston project, on Brainlands Investing, the Canadian government's impact investment arm, Grand Challenges Canada, is already engaged in Brainlands Investing. And these other entities that I mentioned, the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative is very interested in the brain economy and how it can prepare health systems for cognitive screening, basically. Then a slide here on our Nature Medicine Commission, which is about brain health for economic resilience. I'd be happy to share the general framework for this. So you could imagine if you're ever embarking upon a regional transition, I think research is key, right? Because it's fundamentally important to the robustness and credibility. So if our Nature Commission, with its 25 commissioners and the way that we break it up and focus on taxonomy and indexes and implementation, if that's useful in the UK context, you could literally replicate the model and appoint people from different British universities and UK universities and replicate like that. And it really is sort of like the foundations of the house if you're thinking about an economic transition. And then of course you attach on to that private sector and economic development and things. And this just gives you more examples of the types of science that will be involved in nature medicine. So environmental and exposome neuroscience is interesting. So climate, plastics, built environment and design is where UCL is arguably leading the world, with Hugo Spears working on leading a neuroarchitecture international center. Food systems neuroscience is a fascinating area. Here is an example of a health system, UTMB, that's going through this transition. You can see they're doing things across education, research, innovation, clinical care, workforce, and community. So again, you can study these slides in more detail, and often health systems are doing this already. They just don't call it this. They frankly don't have a good way to bring this together and explain their role as an economic agent. So you could imagine going to some NHS trust, and they're probably doing a lot. They just don't call it this. And then the question is there value of doing this through the brain economy? And I think there is, because it's true that the human brain is challenged. The human brain is the seat of productivity. And if we don't do something different, we're kind of screwed. So that's the conclusion here. Stronger brains mean stronger businesses, economies, and societies, and it's time to invest accordingly.